The stranger in the storm. The wind came first, low and whining, like a restless ghost slipping through the cracks of Mary Lou Harris's old cabin. Then came the sky, bruised purple and green, swirling above the endless prairie like an angry sea. The animals had gone quiet hours ago. Even the rooster, usually loud and foolish, hid beneath the wagon with his feathers puffed in fear. Mary Lou stood by the window, watching the clouds twist and churn. She was 26, but the years had worn on her hard, lines of worry etched along her brow, hands roughened from work that never seemed to end. She'd been a widow for nearly 2 years, ever since Tom's accident. The world hadn't stopped for her grief, the bills hadn't stopped, the fields hadn't stopped, and the lonely nights certainly hadn't stopped. Her little farm on the edge of Dawson County was all she had left. A few chickens, one tired milk cow, and land too dry to be kind. But she stayed, because it was home, because it was his. The lantern on her table flickered as the wind pressed hard against the windows. The radio had gone dead hours ago, but she knew what was coming. The horizon carried that sickly spinning look she'd seen once before, a tornado, sure as Judgment Day. She moved fast then, shuttering windows, tying down what she could, leading her cow into the cellar. The air grew thick, heavy, and still. Even the crickets had gone silent. And then, faint at first, she heard it, the sound of hooves. Mary Lou froze, hand stilling on the latch. No one rode out in weather like this. No one sane, anyway. She stepped out onto the porch, the wind whipping her hair across her face. Through the swirling dust and rain, she saw a dark shape moving, a horse, staggering under the force of the wind. The rider slumped low, nearly falling. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and lantern. "Hey!" she shouted into the storm, voice nearly torn away. "Over here! This way!" The man barely lifted his head, but the horse turned, sensing shelter. They struggled toward her, the animal snorting in fear, hooves sliding in the mud. Mary Lou ran forward, grabbing the bridle and pulling them toward her barn. The door slammed behind them with a force that rattled the hinges. The rider slid from the saddle, boots hitting the floor hard. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, and clearly exhausted. His hat was soaked, his coat torn, mud streaking his face. "You're gonna get yourself killed out there," she said, breathless. He gave a faint, weary smile. "Reckon I might've, if not for you." His voice was low and steady, with that western drawl that made every word sound slow and sure. "Come inside," she said quickly. "Storm's just starting." He nodded once, removing his hat and following her into the small cabin. Inside, the place smelled of wood smoke and sage. The fire in the hearth was burning low, and the old kettle on the stove rattled with the wind. Mary Lou fetched him a blanket, motioning for him to sit near the fire. He hesitated before lowering himself onto the worn chair. "Much obliged, ma'am." She poured him a cup of weak coffee, still hot from earlier. "You look half dead. Where were you headed in this mess?" He took the cup, hands trembling slightly. "Was ridin' through Dawson Ridge. Thought I could beat the weather." He gave a faint chuckle. "Turns out I was wrong." "Dawson Ridge," she echoed. "That's near 30 miles west. You rode through that." He shrugged. "Didn't plan on stoppin'. Guess fate had other ideas." She studied him quietly, the cut of his jaw, the way his eyes watched the fire like it held secrets. There was something about him, a calmness, a weight, that didn't match a drifter's kind. Outside, the wind screamed. The door rattled violently, and Mary Lou jumped. He was on his feet in a heartbeat, steadying it with one strong hand. "Get the rope," he said calmly. She handed him one from the hook by the stove. Together, they tied the door shut, bracing it with a heavy table. The cabin shook as the storm hit full force. "Get down!" he shouted, pulling her toward the floor as glass shattered. The window above the sink exploded inward, shards flying. The roar was deafening, like a freight train screaming through the night. They huddled beneath the table, his arm instinctively around her shoulders as the house groaned. The sound of the tornado was a beast, moaning, tearing, devouring everything in its path. Mary Lou buried her face in his chest, trembling. She could feel his heart pounding steady, his voice low against her ear. "It'll pass soon. Just hold on." Minutes felt like hours. When at last the noise began to fade, the silence that followed was worse, heavy and hollow, as if the whole world had been emptied. He rose first, checking the damage. The roof held, barely. One corner of the cabin was torn away, and the barn had half collapsed. But they were alive. Mary Lou stood shakily, clutching her shawl. "My God, I thought it'd take us both." The stranger gave a quiet nod. "You've got a good, strong cabin. You held it together. She laughed softly, half in relief, half in disbelief. You helped. I wouldn't have made it alone. They spent the rest of the night checking for leaks, patching what they could. When the rain settled into a steady drizzle, she lit another lantern and poured him a bowl of stew. He thanked her, eating quietly. Name's Luke, he said finally, glancing up at her. Luke Witt. Well, just Luke. Mary Lou Harris, she replied, giving a small smile. Widow. His eyes softened. I'm sorry for your loss. She nodded. Happened near 2 years ago. Haven't had much company since. Luke stared into his bowl, thoughtful. Sometimes it takes a storm to bring people together. She gave a small laugh. Seems like it. The hours drifted by as they spoke, about the land, the drought, the loneliness of the plains. She learned he'd worked cattle, done odd jobs, traveled from town to town. But he spoke little about himself, and she didn't press. Outside, the world was quiet now, the kind of quiet that follows destruction. When dawn came, the light crept in through the broken window, cold and silver. Mary Lou stepped outside, her heart sinking. Her fences were gone, half her crops flattened, her barn roof caved in. Luke joined her, hat low over his brow. I'll help you fix it, he said simply. You don't have to, she said, though her voice wavered. Storm caught me here, he said. Least I can do is lend a hand. There was something in the way he said it, steady, without expectation. She nodded. All right then. We'll start with the barn. They worked side by side through the morning, hammering, lifting, salvaging what they could. He moved with quiet strength, never complaining, never showing how tired he must have been. When her arms ached, he took over without a word. When she stumbled, he caught her by the arm, steadying her gently. By noon, the worst of the debris was cleared. She brought out biscuits and cold milk, and they sat on the porch steps, watching the clouds drift apart to reveal a wide, endless blue sky. Never thought I'd see the sun again, she said softly. Luke smiled faintly. It always comes back around, ma'am. Always does. For the first time in years, Mary Lou felt something stir inside her, a small spark of hope. Maybe it was the calm after the storm. Maybe it was the stranger beside her, quiet and kind, who'd helped her hold the world together when it was falling apart. She didn't know who he really was, or where he'd go when the roads cleared, but as the light caught his eyes and the breeze carried the smell of rain and wild grass, she had a feeling this storm hadn't just passed through her land. It had passed through her heart. The cowboy's secret. The next morning dawned bright and sharp, the prairie washed clean by rain. The air smelled of wet earth and cedar, and somewhere far off, a meadowlark sang as if to remind the world that life still went on. Mary Lou Harris stepped out of her cabin and drew a deep breath. Her land lay in ruin, fences torn, crops flattened, and the barn missing half its roof, but the sky was clear, and that alone was enough to make her whisper a quiet prayer of thanks. She found Luke already awake, standing by the corral with his sleeves rolled up, hammering new planks into place. He worked steady, sure-handed, like a man who'd spent his life fixing what storms had broken. You start workin' before breakfast, she called, smiling a little. He looked up, tipping his hat. Couldn't sleep much. Figured I'd get a head start. She walked over, holding 2 tin cups of coffee. Well, if you're gonna rebuild half my farm, you'll need this. He took the cup, their fingers brushing lightly, a fleeting touch, but enough to make her heart stir in a way she hadn't felt in years. They worked all morning together, side by side. The rhythm came easy. He lifted the heavy beams, she steadied the boards. He hammered, she fetched nails and rope. It was quiet work, but not the kind that felt lonely. By noon, the sun was high, and Luke finally leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. You've got good land here, he said. Hard, but honest. Mary Lou glanced toward the fields, her face softening. Was my husband's dream. He wanted to build something that'd last. Luke's gaze lingered on her. You've kept it going. That takes grit. She gave a tired smile. Sometimes I wonder why. The bank keeps sendin' letters. Half the town thinks I should sell what's left and move on. He studied her for a long moment. You think you could? She shook her head slowly. No. Tom's buried here. This land's the only thing that still feels like him. Luke nodded. Then you hold on to it. Some things are worth fightin' for. That afternoon, the wind picked up again, gentler this time, and the prairie shimmered gold under the sun. Luke hitched his horse, midnight, to the wagon and told her he was riding into town for supplies. I'll be back before sundown, he said. Mary Lou offered him a small basket she'd packed, biscuits, jerky, a jar of preserves. So you don't have to waste money on food. He hesitated, a strange look crossing his face. You sure? I owe you more than a meal, Mr. Luke. He smiled faintly. Just Luke, remember? He didn't return by sundown. Mary Lou waited on the porch, watching the long road that wound past the cottonwoods. The crickets began to sing, and the horizon burned orange, then red, then violet. Still no sign of him. She told herself not to worry. Men got delayed, wagons broke, horses tired. But as the moon rose and the night deepened, she found herself standing by the fence, arms folded, eyes scanning the dark. It wasn't just fear, it was something else. A pull. When she finally heard the soft clop of hooves on the road, relief flooded her. Luke rode up quietly, the wagon full, new lumber, sacks of seed, even a coil of barbed wire. "Where'd you get all this?" she asked, stunned. He dismounted, eyes shadowed by his hat. "Had a little business to settle in town." "But Luke, this is expensive. I can't pay you for all this." He met her gaze calmly. "Didn't say you had to. Consider it thanks." "Thanks? For what? You're the one that nearly got killed in that storm." He smiled faintly. "And you're the one that pulled me out of it. Seems fair." She frowned, still bewildered. "Luke, I can't take charity." "I won't." He set a hand gently on her arm. "It's not charity, ma'am. Just call it help between friends." Something in the way he said it, quiet, honest, made her chest tighten. She nodded, unable to find the words. Days passed, and the farm began to look alive again. The fences stood straight, the barn roof mended, and the field, though scarred, held promise once more. The townsfolk began to notice. Old Mrs. Cutter from the general store stopped by one morning, peering over the gate with sharp eyes. "Well, Mary Lou Harris, I'd say you've got yourself quite a helper," she said, smiling slyly. "That's a fine man workin' your land." Mary Lou flushed. "He's just a traveler. Helpin' till he moves on." Mrs. Cutter chuckled. "A traveler, you say? Honey, that man's no drifter. You don't buy half the town's supplies in cash if you're just passin' through." Mary Lou blinked. "What are you talkin' about?" "Bought near everything from Harlan's Mercantile. Paid up front, too. Name on the receipt said Luke Whitaker." The name hit her like a stone dropped in water. She knew it, everyone did. Whitaker Ranch covered miles of land west of town. Luke Whitaker was one of the wealthiest cattlemen in the county, quiet, solitary, and rarely seen. Her hands trembled slightly as she thanked Mrs. Cutter and sent her on her way. That evening, when Luke came in from the fields, she waited for him by the fire. The room was quiet except for the crackle of wood and the soft ticking of the clock. "Luke," she said finally, "I went into town today." He nodded, setting his hat on the table. "That right? I heard something. About your last name." He froze for just a moment, just long enough for her to see the truth in his eyes. "Whitaker," she said softly. "Is it true?" He sighed, sitting down. "Yeah, it's true. Why didn't you tell me?" He looked up at her, his expression calm but weary. "Because it didn't matter. Not here. You saw me as a man, not a name. And I liked that." She crossed her arms, torn between confusion and disbelief. "You own half this county, Luke. You've got more money than anyone around here. And yet you showed up on my doorstep in a storm, like some drifter." His gaze softened. "Money can't stop a tornado, Mary Lou. It can't fix loneliness either." The words hung heavy in the air. He rose then, stepping closer. "I've got land, yes. Cattle, too. But I don't have anyone who gives a damn whether I come home or not. You didn't ask for my name, or my money. You just opened your door." Her throat tightened. "I didn't do it for anything in return." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why it meant something." For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the widow and the cowboy, bound by storm and circumstance, standing in the soft glow of firelight. Finally, he spoke again. "I came here expectin' to pass through. But I can't ride away from this place. Or from you." Mary Lou's heart pounded. "Luke." He took her hand gently, rough fingers brushing her skin. "Let me help you rebuild for good. I'll see to it the farm's yours, debt paid, fences strong. You don't owe me a thing. I just want to be part of something worth staying for." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said softly. "Say you'll let me stay." She swallowed hard, her heart pulling in two directions, the fear of trusting again, and the quiet longing for something she thought she'd buried with Tom. "I've been alone a long time," she whispered. "Didn't think I could open my heart again." Luke smiled faintly. "Sometimes all it takes is one storm to show you what still stands." She gave a shaky laugh, brushing away tears. "You sure have a way with words, Mr. Whitaker." He grinned. "Guess I do when I'm tellin' the truth." Outside, the wind had stilled completely. The prairie stretched wide and golden beneath the stars, peaceful and alive. Luke stepped closer, cupping her cheek gently. "Mary Lou," he murmured, "you saved me that night, not just from the storm, but from the kind of life that don't mean much without someone to share it." Her lips parted in a trembling smile. "And you brought my world back to life." He leaned in, their foreheads touching, breath mingling like a promise carried on the soft prairie air. In the silence that followed, the clock ticked on, slow and steady, marking the moment two broken souls found their way home. Epilogue. Weeks later, the farm stood strong again. New fences gleamed in the sun, the barn roof shone with fresh timber, and the fields, green and stubborn, began to rise once more. Mary Lou stood at the porch railing, watching the horizon. Luke rode in from the fields, his horse's coat glistening in the light. He dismounted and smiled up at her, that quiet, knowing smile she'd come to love. "You were right," she said softly. "The sun does come back around." He took her hand, pressing it to his heart. "Always does, darlin'. Especially after a storm." And there, beneath the wide Texas sky, the widow who'd lost everything and the cowboy who had everything found what both had been missing, each other.